Okay, so we're now into hanging sheetrock, and things to pay attention when you're hanging sheetrock, really important. One, first thing I do when I prep is I'll run a level across the framing just to check for any inconsistencies we might have missed all the way up to this point. Make sure that if there are some walls that are a little bit out, that we get everything shimmed up and looking good now, so we're not into tape and compound on the drywall later, and we end up with walls that are bowing and not looking good, especially when we get into some millwork. So first thing you want to do is you want to go just triple check your framing, make sure everything's good enough to start hanging flat walls, and then you want to start coming back. Generally, you want to come back, start hanging ceiling first, and then you come into your sheets and start hanging from the ceiling down. But in this case, we're a little short-staffed right now, so we're going to start on the very bottom, hang that very first sheet, and then when we get our guys back in here, we can start hanging the ceiling and come back down to meet that joint. Drywall nowadays, there's so much stuff that you can make it look and make it run a lot easier, and that's a couple things to look at. Is you're going to have a tapered joint here on your rock. So this actual bevel here on these joints actually curls in. So it's a half-inch sheet, but it's 3/8 at this edge here because it's going to bevel in. So when you're doing your tape in your mud, by the time you get 3 coats, sometimes 4 coats of mud on those joints, that actually levels out and makes a flat surface, and it's not actually bulging out when you finish your tape and your mud. So that's an important thing to think about. You want obviously as many factory joints butting up as possible. So think about that as you're starting to hang it, unless you're having somebody else do it. Second thing to think about is when you're running all of your joints is to think about, just like when you're doing subfloor or anything else, you need to have those joints staggered, and your layout is important. So down here in a basement, we can only really get 4x8 sheets down here. 4x12 would be great, but the problem with that is access to get them in and get them around the corners, coming down the stairs or through the window wells can get really tricky. So 4x8 is way easier to handle in a shorter space below grade. So with that being said, the staggering of those joints becomes even that much more important. So doing your layout is crucial when you're working with shorter sheets especially. But you want to make sure that those joints are offset and you have as few joints as possible, because that taping for the seams is important when you're doing, especially if you're trying to get a no texture kind of flat wall. Down here we're doing actually a knockdown texture, so it's, I would say, not as crucial. I wouldn't really want to advise that, but it's not as crucial as if you're doing like a level 5 finish where there's no texture at all and a flat wall. So doing your layout is important, to pay attention to those joints as you're laying them out. And then the other thing we got to think about is as we get into an inspection is, and paying attention to the integrity of rock. If you can look here, as I've got all my screws 12 inches. This is just like plywood when you're doing your sheathing. Everything in the field's gonna be 12 inches or less on center. Okay, you can see those as I run up. We get to our joints, we really want to make sure that we have a good solid half sheet on that framing, on that structure, as we're running our screws, which will then entail a 6-inch on center at the edges. That's crucial to make sure you've got a good bond to the framing structure itself. And the other thing you want to pay attention to when you're setting your screw is you want to make sure that it's just below the surface, okay? Below the surface, but not deep into that rock, because once that head pulls through the actual first layer of that sheetrock, it's no longer actually holding that sheet on the structure itself. And if there's any sort of movement, any sort of pull, you can actually start having not only screw pop, but you can also have some bulging in the wall where it's actually literally pulling away from the structure. So you want to make sure that you're diving those screws at the right depth, and really to set, if you're running your screw gun for the first time, just do a couple practice sheets to get that depth where I kind of like to feel. You can see here, I like to feel my thumb just really like a tapered edge. It's the same thing. Just get the first edge of my thumb into that hole. That's the depth that I want. It's just below the surface, but no deeper than that. And you don't want any screws that are sticking out, obviously, because when you go to tape and mud, they're going to bulge out, and that's not going to cover. So you got to make sure that depth is correct as you're running them. And if it's changing as you're running your sheets around, just kind of keep paying attention to where your screw depth is. It's crucial for sure. So those are kind of the tips to think about as you're running your sheetrock. And once we get everything hung, obviously we're gonna have our screw inspection. They look for that 12 and 6 on center. And then they're also going to look for any wet areas and have a cement board behind it, and what we're going to do with those, you know, like a shower area. I hang all that separate of the rock, guys, just because I like to make sure that's so crucial when you're doing tile. It's completely square and level. I'm real picky about that, so that's something I'll come back in and do after they're done. But we have to have that before inspection. So there you go. We're going to probably be done here tomorrow, and then I'm going to call that in for inspection, and then we're into tape, mud, and texture, and then paint and millwork after that. So we're moving along here as we go. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, comments below will be appreciated, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Make sure you check out all the other videos. Later.